on transformers. So we have a great set of speakers today. I'll start introducing them. But before that, I'm Prasanna. I'm the founder of Upekkha. We help SaaS startups grow faster. We work with some 60 startups now, and I've worked with some awesome founders who made a shift from services to product the hard way. Many of them have now crossed $1 million ARR, $5 million ARR, $10 million in ARR. But that journey has not been without speed breakers. And many times unlearning is harder than new learning. Right? So what we're going to look at and see in this session, what we're going to ask these people is, and hopefully it'll be a very interactive session, is that we're asking them some hard questions. We're asking them, hey, what is it that you had to unlearn? What is it that you learned on this journey? What skill did you have when you were doing a service startup that helped you in the product side, right? And we have a mix of people. And so for the first person, his name is Derick. He's the CPO at Flutura. So he's the chief product officer at Flutura. They're an IoT company. In the past, he has been at Mindtree, and he's worked in at solving problems in telecom, banking, and consumer products. He's a passionate entrepreneur. He loves black and white photography and loves to listen to Natarajan and Pink Floyd. Derick, can we have you on stage? The next person on stage is...
Hi, thank you, Derick. How are you?
Welcome.
Good.
So the next person on stage is Sudha Bhamidipati. She's a co-founder of Worxogo. It's an award-winning AI company, and they work on sales enablement. She's going to talk about her learnings on in the transition from consulting, where she was working at PricewaterhouseCoopers and IBM before she started Worxogo. So please welcome Sudha. Next.
Thank you, Prasanna.
Hey, Sudha, good to see you here.
Thank you so much. Look forward.
The next person is going to be talking about sales. It's Vaidhyanathan. He's the CEO and co-founder at Altizon. He was earlier VP of sales at Persistent, where he was heading sales for, I think, India, Middle East, and so on. And before that, he was a techie. And I know both Derick and Vinay from the Microsoft Accelerator. So he's going to be primarily talking about the GTM differences in services companies and product companies. Please welcome Vinay on stage.
Great to be here. Hi.
Hey, Vinay. The next person on stage is Jaya Vaidhyanathan. She's the CEO of BCT Digital. They are building financial products and platforms for the banking and finance sector around fraud and compliance and risk management. Jaya has been previously at Accenture, and she's also on the boards of a couple of very large companies, Altran and UTI AMC. She's going to be talking about the differences between consulting and products. She's also had a brief stint at a customer, and where she led a very large digital initiative. So she's in multiple sides of the whole story. So please welcome Jaya Vaidhyanathan onto the stage.
Thank you, Prasanna.
Hey, Jaya, good to have you here. And last but not least is Krishnakumar Natarajan, also known as KK. So he's here to, he's earlier co-founder at Mindtree, now co-founder of a very new, brand new baby called Mela Ventures. He's going to share his learnings of how services founders approach capital, and how product founders should approach capital, and what he's looking to do when he is investing in entrepreneurs on the product side. So please welcome KK.
Hey, Prasanna, good to be here.
Hey, KK. Good to have you, all you folks. So my job here is to mostly stay quiet. We're going to try to do this in an interactive fashion. So folks, any of you in the audience, if you have questions, please drop them into the Q&A. I will be curating those questions. So the format is going to be like this. Each speaker here will speak for 5 minutes and then take a couple of questions from the other members in the panel, right? From KK and the other members in the panel. So we'll go round robin. The order will be Derick, followed by Sudha, followed by Vinay, followed by Jaya, and finally KK. And at the end, we'll also, I would have been going through the audience questions, and I'll take those audience questions to the panelists on the audience's behalf. So without taking any more time, Derick, over to you.
Thank you, Prasanna. Uh, Good evening, everybody. In the next 5 minutes, I basically wanted to touch upon three themes we encountered as a company in Flutura while building a product. So the first theme from a product management perspective is the type of problem we are solving. So is it a vitamin or a painkiller? It's very important really classify the problem as a vitamin or a painkiller. I'll define that. Example. So when we initially entered the oil and gas market, there was a Macondo blast, and we felt collecting sensor signals and alarming them to an impending blast would be of immense value to them because those actually save lives. We built a product, went into the market, and we found out that everybody liked the product, but they were not willing to buy. We found it very strange. You have a product which can potentially save lives. Everybody said it's good, but nobody's ready to buy it. When we dug deeper, we found two problems with it. One is there was no allocated budget for it, and the link between our product and the safety outcome was not very tangible in their heads. So if it is tangible and the budget is allocated, we call it a painkiller. So then we pivoted to another problem where we are predicting the life of a product and intervening. That was actually a true painkiller because it was budgeted for, and they were clearly able to link the output we produced to the outcome they cared about. So one of the first questions is your product a painkiller or a vitamin? And that was very, very important for us because we lost a lot of time and money on solving a vitamin, which we felt we were passionate about. The second important learning for us was product market fit itself. There are multiple definitions of it, and we got cluttered in our head. So I'll take an example. So we created a product for the process chemical industry where we will predict the probability of a batch getting rejected, and every reject costs a lot of money. We did this for industrial adhesives. We did this for catalyst manufacturing plants of Honeywell, and this was successfully sold and currently deployed in 20 countries. A very key learning out of that from product marketing fit was there are two definitions of it which came to us. The first definition of it came to us from B.V. Jagdish, who's on our advisory board. He said it's a very simple definition. If an average salesman can sell to an average customer, you have product market fit. Okay. And it was a very simple definition, made sense because initially the three of us, Krishna, Srikant, and myself, we used to complicate the sales process only to very mature customers. And we found while it is very intellectually stimulating, it will not scale. And this definition became the center focus mantra for us. Now, if you want to unpack it from a product through the product lens, right? We looked at it from three perspectives. One is there feature market fit? So many a times as product managers, we tend to over-engineer the product. So the mantra we had was remove a feature and see if the customer actually misses that feature. So that would give you a fit of whether the feature matches the market. The second important dimension to product market fit was message market fit. In the first 15 seconds, whatever you show or whatever you say, does that make the customer's eyes dilate or show some body language which evinces interest in whatever you're saying or whatever you're showing? There has to be a message market fit. And third is pricing market fit. Is it amenable to the budgets they had in mind? So if you can actually complicate this a lot more, but I'm keeping it simple out here. So if you have message market fit, feature market fit, and pricing market fit, there's a reasonable probability of this taking. So that was one learning from a product management perfectly. And the third important thing, which is something we are focused on obsessively right now, is trying to make your product a habit. And many people ask, well, how do you make a product a habit? So in the so the definition of a habit is something which you do without thinking. So you do WhatsApp without thinking, you do Google Mail without thinking. Those are all products which have taken our lives, and we do not think twice about using it. It has entered your subconscious layer. In the B2B side, you have some of the products that pipe drive, at least from has become a habit for many people. They use it to see the deal size and stuff like that. In the industrial setting, the one place where we have actually managed to transition from a product perspective habit is for well scoring. So if you look at a typical operations manager for well drilling operations. He has to manage 200 wells. He had about 35 engineers who has to go and look at this. And every day morning, what he does is he puts on paper and pencil the route the engineers must take to handle these things. He prioritizes that based on his instincts. So we put a small app together which actually looks at the anomalies and scores the health of each of these assets, so that the route tracking for each of these engineers is done. It's become a habit right now. These guys don't think about it. One click, it generates it. So anytime someone can interact with your product without thinking, and it becomes a high frequency user. You use it not quarterly, or you use it almost daily or weekly, then habit form. And it's not
Nice.
easy to do. And we're trying to transition many of our products towards habit. So with that, I'll leave it out to the others.
Awesome. So, KK, do you have a question for Derick now?
Derek, that's a very interesting observation. Both the ability to sell is dependent on an average salesperson selling to an average customer. But can you elaborate more on how do you make the product a habit? It's easier said than done. Now, can that build a company? Because you did talk about a very specific example, but that's not going to be the mainstream of revenue for Flutura.
No, so in the industrial category, making a product a habit is not going to be easy. Involves a lot of change management on the field. But I would say in the B2B space and the B2C space, it's relatively less easy. I do agree with you. Uh, Less than 10% of our products would be habit shaping. Right? Primarily because the mental models in this industry still have not fully embraced digital. So it would take a lot of education and seeding before I think things can be, and it's also a function of how you simplify it. If you look at the interactions we had with our product, it was fairly complex earlier. If you look at it, one of our mantras is make everything one click, and it's very easier said than done. And once you make it one click, then the probability of someone doing something without thinking dramatically increases, and his hesitancy towards interacting with your product increases. So I would say it's a function of the receptivity of the mental model and the low friction in the interaction, which can really light it up. And
So,
I agree with you. Industrial has not reached that stage. It's a tough market, but we are hopeful in the next 3 to 5 years they will go.
so Derick, between a Mindtree and now, right? What is something that you had to unlearn in the early days? What is a skill that you had, something that you were good at that didn't work for you once you went to Flutura or once you started Flutura?
um, I think learning to say no. I would say, in a summary, it was very, very difficult.
Can you give an example of when you said yes and you regretted?
No, I think in the initial stages of the company, I'll be very practical. We need the revenue. We'll never say no to anything, right? We want to keep ourselves afloat. We would say no to it. But over a period of time, that slowly we started seeing concentration of revenue, some of the use cases. Then it became a little, it was not an easy transition, I would say, but trying to have confidence that you found one repeatable use cases which can be generalized and
No, but what I'm asking, Derek, sorry to bump in, is what was the cost of not saying no?
is energy being lost in a lot of other things. Energy is more important than capital. So we dissipated a lot of energy into multiple things. I would say we spread ourselves thin. Okay, and there are a lot of effects due to that. You see concentration of revenues. No investors look at you differently. So, but I think that is very important. The most important cost of not saying no is dissipation.
Got it. And so, when is it like a borderline? Like, should you say yes? Should you say no? Like, when was it like hard to say no?
No, when the ticket size was big, and we still had confidence in our project, and we debated it among the three of us. It was a lot of debate. It's very difficult to say no to money, but so it's a process.
Got it. So, Jaya, Vinay, Sudha, do you folks have any specific question to ask Derek?
So I think actually just a comment actually around what Derick said about stickiness of the product, right? And I am sure Derick is also experienced it. At the end of the day, if we are working in an area where the digitalization overall is, a little lesser than what you would expect in the consumer side, right? The fact that you got something connected is itself sticky. Just if in the manufacturing world, somebody has a daily stand-up on a production meeting of some kind, right? And if they're doing it off your dashboard, that forms a habit. So all of that are things that go along with. So very often we also learned that, and I'm sure this like it's not the really ultra sexy ML and all of that. It's really, hey, did I make my morning meeting easier of a dashboard that is culling data, right? And I'm sure, Derick, there were moments like that too in your journey. So if could you share something like that?
No, you're right. While the initial thrust was, I mean, we like our shiny new toys. We like AI, ML. So initial days, I would say in the first 2 years, we would walk into an upstream operator's office. We would have a bunch of maintenance guys and we would throw out these terms and they would be like they're looking at headlights. Right. So at the end of the day, they wanted idli vada sambar. They just wanted the dashboard to see if it is right, and that was a big learning for us because we had the curse of knowledge, I would say. We loved a lot of things. No, but I think that's where your message really makes contact with real market, and to see their reactions and respond, and that was a learning loop we learned. Really talking to guys who had grease on their face and say that I don't need, and for them, they just couldn't believe that a machine can learn and predict. They said, what is it? I can listen to the sound of the equipment and say, how do you figure out when it's made? And they found it's a very tough mental model. They just can't relate to the fact that you have something invisible running and data and AI was invisible and it somehow sucks something out and predicts. So they felt everything had to be tangible. Unless until you listen to the sound of the machine, you can't predict it. So we were this clash of mindsets, I would say. I was very humbling to learn that. Just dashboard.
Thanks, Derick. So let's move to Sudha. Sudha, why don't you share your learnings in the transition from consulting to Worxogo?
Thank you. Thank you, Prasanna. Thank you all. I'm Sudha, as Prasanna introduced, and I'm a co-founder at Worxogo. It's an AI company that focuses on improving sales productivity of sales teams. The thing that you realize when you start up a company is the number of functions that come into play. It is not just one or the other. So you start with an idea, you get it to an MVP, you take it to a product, you start to sell. When you're selling, you need to think of pricing, you need to think of contracting, you need to think of security and non-disclosure agreements with enterprises. Then you get into deployment, you get into support, you get into analytics and usage of your product that can feed back into your product and improve the product. I haven't even started talking about things like people management and finance and accounts and administration, all of which need to go through. The thing that services people have well is all these things, right? We've all done many of them. If you've managed a large team, if you've run a P&L, you've done many of these functions. The piece that you don't do ever in a services company is deal with investors. I'm sure Jaya has a different experience, but none of us had met with investors from a selling point of view, selling your company point of view. So I think services people are very, very well positioned to get into product. What would I say are the important things in a product company? First and foremost is focus. You got to say what is that single thing you're going to focus on and put your entire money and resources behind it. We had 3 products, somewhat like Derick. Each of us had our hobby horses and we went and we sold those and we fought amongst ourselves, amongst the co-founders to say which one is doing better. But the fact is the company energy is singular. It cannot be multiple, at least not for a startup. So focus, in my mind, is the most important thing. If you can get it done quickly, it's fantastic. The second is an all customer view. Every time a customer says, and I want this and I want that, and I'm your biggest revenue earner, it's very tempting. And in the early days, like Derick said, we did it too. And I do have an instance of that, and I will come to it a little later. But the all customer view, what are the analytics saying? Who's using what at what frequency? Is it becoming a habit, like Derick said? third point I would say is it configurable versus code involvement? So when you deploy the product at a customer, are you configuring it so a lower order person can go out there and do it? Your client success team, your partner, your client himself or customer himself. If it requires code, you must rethink it. You must say, how do I move it to configurability so I can get it going quickly? The next point that I think is very important is how do you ring fence the product and engineering people from ops people? Ops is day to day. You have to do it. Clients, your customers, the engine is running and it has to run. There is no point in the day you can say I can forget about my existing customers and focus on product. But that is a management challenge you have to deal with. How do I ring fence these people? So operations focuses on current customers, and our product folks, where the brains are, will focus on the future, which is where your company is going to get built. The only mantra is scale and repeatability. In my mind, if you can do a small thing, do it well, do it at scale, become indispensable for your customers in that particular thing, I think it's a great winning combination. I'm done with my piece, Prasanna.
KK, do you have a question or thought for Sudha?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think it's a great articulation, Sudha. But as you have sort of thought about and growing, what do you think are some of the inhibitors which really are not allowing you to scale up? Because scale becomes a very important thing. So, can you share some of your learnings on that to the audience?
So the focus part I think is important, which means if you can focus your product and the use cases, and you have successful use cases which give the kinds of results that those customers are looking for, whatever those benefits are. For us, it's productivity. For Derick, it's something else. If you can create those case studies and then you can simply blast it into the target market. And it's not easy because there are elements of your whole, you need to get your ISO certification done because without IT security, nobody giving you their data. I mean, so the building blocks in enterprise are multiple. It's not just your product. It is the integration with your customers' data or whatever system they have. It is, uh, I mean, there are so many pieces and so many moving parts, but I think the moment you can make it all come together and say, this is my use case, this is my target audience, this is my pricing which has worked. Here's a video for this customer to explain to him how my case worked and what the benefits were. Here is all my marketing material, and here is the list of all the potential customers. I think that's when you can do scale. But of course, your back-end organization needs to be ready to receive it, right?
Ready to
Your integration still needs to happen. Your deployment needs to happen. So I think it is the readiness to come to that point where you can then explode is one way of looking at it. I don't think we all have the answers. We're all, it's one of those tending towards kind of thing. It is never going to get there easily.
I
Jaya, do you have
yeah,
a
I
question?
will go ahead with the question. Sudha, so we are going to touch probably deep dive a little bit on what you use towards scale, right? So scalability is of multi-dimensional. One is product scaling, which is essentially more about how many users can it handle. Can it had can it handle an enterprise level kind of licensing and not crash? Second is the market scaling. How many users does it make sense to break even in terms of the product viability as such? And I think the most important scale is that you were at PwC. So it's not hard to recruit when you have a PwC brand. As Worxogo, how did you get about scaling the business of recruiting people? So I would probably maybe a few seconds on each of those dimensions would really help us, the audience also understand some of the inhibitors, more passive inhibitors here, but would love to hear more on that.
So I think scaling depends on in my mind, and mine is limited to my experience, which is
Yeah.
really for the last 5-6 years. In my mind, our target audience has always been large corporates. So we never started with small because everyone wants to be an SAP, not to be a talent. I'm sorry. I mean, this is not to, uh, uh, disparage anybody. It's just the positioning that you're looking for. So we went after the ICICI banks and the HDFC banks and the big companies, and the pressure on scale, your product scaling is immediate. There is no, I mean, you do your paid pilot, and the moment they're ready to go ahead, they're saying, okay, we have 5,000 users, let's run with these people. So you better be prepared for that. So that's the way we scale. I don't know how other people might scale. Market scaling is what I answered KK, which I think is getting all the pieces in place. If it's Europe, then you need your GDPR. You can't do without GDPR. If it is the US, you need to think about if you're going to the healthcare space, you need that, whatever that, HIPAA, whatever. Yeah, they have a ton of regulation. I'm just saying for market scaling, and I think we can all accept that Indian market is great, but it doesn't have depth in each industry. So uh, I think today customers are willing to pay money. They're willing to pay for pilots. It's a very, very different environment from say 7-8 years back. It's a fantastic place to be. Most of our customers will say, we want to pay you. We don't, the idea is not to get things free out of you. So that's good. On the people side, I think in the last 5 years, I have a lot of the kids that are coming out of schools, and I'm talking about ISBs and IIMs, want to be associated with state, startup. It seems like the sexy thing to do now. We are not in the space where we will be having thousands and thousands of people. Our idea is to retain our team to be as small as possible, automate operations, try and get it to scale with a small core team. You may have channel members or channel partners that may help you configure your product, help you sell. I mean, they're varying models, but that's the short answer. I'm sorry if I sort of took more time than required. Prasanna, sorry.
Yeah. No, thank you. You're bang on, Sudha. Thanks a lot.
I hope I've answered your question, Jaya.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Awesome. Hey, Vinay, so can we have you on next?
Sure. Thanks. So I think taking a cue from the previous ones, my focus is on the go-to-market side, and I want to reiterate one critical message because I know this is a NASSCOM crowd. I have spent about a decade at Persistent running the US East for them from a services standpoint in Boston right after their IPO, and then set up Asia Pacific, Middle East. So I would like to say I identify with them on the sales side a lot more. My tech career has been purely on the product side though. So I think services and folks in the services industry, in my opinion, have a great advantage. In enterprise SaaS, where you're talking of high ticket kind of enterprise product, because the industry has grown selling into large companies and selling large ticket sizes and all of that. So there is in my opinion, a huge advantage in that journey, right? So let me just take a step back. I have a couple of minutes just to share about our story. So for us, and again, taking a cue from what Derick and Sudha said, right? So we are an industrial IoT products company, okay? And we started our journey in 2013 as a pure industrial IoT platform, okay? And in those days, the sector wasn't there, right? So my biggest point is that product market fit in our experience has been a journey as opposed to something that we knew worked from day one, right? So we conceived ourselves when we started the company, two co-founders, great buddies of mine, Yogi and Ranj, who look at the tech side and me on the sales side, as being initially a platform company, okay? And platforms are super sexy, and you want developers to build off your platform, and we built it in that way, right? We created a version, we put it out there, and realized, hey man, there's nobody building on it, right? And and we experienced something that Derick mentioned a little earlier, in the sense that there were a lot of developers, okay, who are using it, but nobody was paying us money, right? It wasn't the honeypot that we expected it to be. And then we quickly realized, hey, okay, now this needs to change, right? And then we moved to saying, okay, let's build products using the on top of the platform, right? Never violating the API karma. Build as if you are using your own thing. We had one app which was like a standard starter productivity app that we had, but we didn't have anything holistic that could be made as an enterprise sale, right? So we said, okay, let's do that journey, and we did that journey, right? And that has been a great learning process for us in terms of evolving our product platform, and that's when the company took off, right? And we had the ability to scale. So a little bit, and it took time for the market to develop, right? Even today, I think the biggest driver has been 2020, as opposed to the 6 years before that, that we have done all our standard Series A rounds and all of that. We raised money using whatever things we needed to say, but at the end of the day, the market is happening right now in front of our eyes, right? So, you cannot time this, right? So be prepared for the long haul, and it does work out if you have done the right hygiene things as you battle it out in some senses, right? So let me come back to the core theme, right? And I genuinely believe that high touch sales models, go to markets, right, is something that is in the DNA of services also, and a lot of you will have that, and the solution approach, selling approach, but now you have an IP component to tag along with you. You're not, in fact, living by the vicissitudes of the services operations team staffing people up to make the numbers, right? Here you have something that is going to work and scale globally without you adding people. So it was a huge sense of freedom for me personally, as we looked at, Persistent, we had scaled from like 20-30 million to about 200 by the time we went IPO in that 5-6 year period that I was there. And that's a very different ballgame, right? Here, and I always used to say, deal to close here, but I don't know how much revenue I'm going to make until all of these things, 10 things happen, right? Here, it's going to happen, right? Because you are going to you have an IP that you're leveraging to make it happen. And the important thing is the buyer user mapping, right? I think services, again, companies know that a lot better than some of I'm just saying vis-a-vis other entrepreneurs from other backgrounds, right? If you have done that, you understand that the buyer is different from the user, and you're better at mapping large enterprises in many ways. So these are inherent skills. Now, what are the learnings? And we hit some of those points already, but I think I'll emphasize just 2 or 3 critical ones. The entire mindset on marketing, right? Services where you're used to a lot of BS websites that talk about case studies that present 1 day's work as 1 year's work. That's not going to fly in a product setup. You have to, as Sudha mentioned very lucidly, right? You really need to know what you're doing and what value you're providing to a customer, and you need to be able to communicate that in all forms, right? There is a spend on marketing that is important for as you move from services to products in particular, right? And the brand and the analyst outreach is very important if you're looking at new industry, right? 30 seconds, right? And the critical thing is that industry chambers have been, conferences have been better for us as we looked at go-to-market in particular, since that's what I had to comment on. And talent is rare on marketing, right? So that's something that you need to be aware of as you look at this whole picture. Just 2 final points. I think India market has been a savior for us. In the last 7 years, there have probably been 700, platforms that have come and gone. And we also started thinking India is a pure, trial market. Yahan product will ensure that it works, and then look at international. And the only reason we are standing right now is because the India market clicked, right? So now we are global. Half our revenues are outside of India and all of that. But don't discount that market. And third, while your products, and it's very important to have focus, but solutions matter, right? Especially if you're the initial part of it's important that you have some form of a way in which you build solutions for customers till you get to a particular scale where other system integrators, scale up and take it for you, right? And the ROI is your responsibility as you look at, you can't just ship and forget, right? Because you're just going to have signups and drops, right? So you will get the 1-year SaaS license, but it will not renew. Right. So these are the 2-3 critical things. I mean, with that, I conclude my opening thoughts.
Thanks, Vinay. KK, do you have a question for him?
Yes, sure. No, Vinay, that's a very, very interesting experience. And I'm sure there are a lot of people in the audience who are also wanting to learn from you, saying, how does this whole product market fit really play itself out when you move across markets? You did say that India really helped you out. So can you give a simple example of how you established the product market fit when you moved away from India to start addressing global markets?
Yeah. So there is no real, silver bullet apart from knowing your customers, right? So we were working on the industrial side, and we started off with auto because we started off in Pune, so there's a bunch of automotive here, right? And they supply to the world, right? So there was this notion initially when we built a product that perhaps the legacy kind of factories are where the we are finding attraction, and for the more advanced factories perhaps it's not relevant. What we realized is that India has everything, right? We live in all generations, so it was a fabulous trial market because you go on to a market like the US, right? You will again have factories of all diversity. So I think there's a lot more fear than there is actual data and experiences. So customer development, being able to get talking to the customers, validating what you have done in India with directly with a similar kind of company in the US, there is no substitute to that, right? But at least our experience has been that India was a huge advantage because we had everything from the best factory setups in the world here to the more manual driven discrete manufacturing setups that you have, right? So that's been at least our experience. And always, right, I think Derick mentioned this, and he also sells into the international market, right? Analytics is great and it is sexy. It is great to show a great demo. At the end of the day, which habits and which behaviors are you appealing to? And those don't really change globally, right? If you're looking at a typical industry, right? And we now work across automotive, food, chemicals. So it's fairly diverse bucket, and there's a lot more fear and pushback from the analysts and the VCs as opposed to the actual customers, right? So you need to have different answers for different sets.
So, Vinay, what is a sales technique or something that you did on sales which works in services but doesn't work in product?
Services here, you just say yes to everything, right? It can be done. So that never works in. I mean, that's not the whole model is different, right? So it's a show and tell model. There is, similarities as I pointed out in the sense that you need to understand your buyer seller. All those are similar, right? I think the critical thing is going out there and say my product will do everything for you is the classical mistake, right? It's better to say, hey, it does these three things, and then if those are acceptable, then move to the next stage and say, okay, what is the fourth thing you wanted? Let me see if I can do it, rather than the other way around. Hey, all four things are okay, right? And too many pilots, always kill you. So that's different from products and services. So paid pilots is important. Services, actually it was easier. You never said that you use my services for free for a month and then see. Product, everybody expects that, right? So these are different kind of things, right? So we did a lot of free stuff that never went anywhere in the initial years. Now we don't do that, right? So that's very important.
Sudha, you had a question?
I did. How do you, I mean, so all of us services people know how to sell to the first 15, 20, 25 clients, right? I think the trick is to take it to 1,000 and 10,000 and 100,000. How do you, that scale up and that jump up, how do you think it should be taken up and handled?
So, in all humility, I think we are still there, yet to get to that point where I can say I have 1,000 customers. I do have, about 10, 12 large kind of billion-dollar setups that have maybe amongst them 500 odd plans. But so I wouldn't completely be in a position to answer that question at this point, Sudha. So hopefully 1 year from now.
Great. So thanks, Vinay. So we'll move on to Jaya. Jaya, do you want to share your journey and like what your learnings are?
Absolutely. The journey that I took to get to where I am in terms of building products has been non-linear. I started my career as an investment banker and then moved on to management consulting. I was with Accenture for a number of years, moved to core technology with the bank, and then said, what, we are going to build product. And we had a vision, which was make in India for India and take it to global. So this journey, when people say it's a non-linear progression, I do think it's a linear progression. And the reason I say that is each of these diverse career tracks has taught something quite unique, which I feel that I apply as a life lesson in selling a product. First, let's look at probably investment banking. The fundamental learning from investment banking is to look at how do you story tell with numbers. Numbers are the ones that you can't, beat around the bush. They are things that you can't kind of like hide behind. They tell you a clear story. And that's the single version of the truth, nothing but the truth. So help me God, right? So that is something I learned. Maybe I can explain that with an example as to how it applied when selling a product. So we build products. I didn't say what we build products in. We build products in for financial services, fintech, classical. And there's a chosen area we chose to start with, which was risk technology. Now, the first question somebody may ask, why risk technology? Banking is kind of like you have so many cool payments products, etc. Why did you pick risk technology? Because regardless of the cyclical cycle, you have to spend on risk and compliance. As simple as that, and therefore it has the lowest barrier to entry because compliance keeps changing and you can build new products around it. So as pure and simple as to why that chosen field. Now coming back to telling a story with numbers. So I the first customer you go to and you say, you know what, it solves your compliance problem, it does early warning systems, you get alerts, you act on it, you're never going to have an NPA. Yeah, like that's cool, but you know what? We have great staff. They've been with the bank for a number of years, and you go to a public sector bank. They're like, are you trying to take our jobs away? They didn't say go away, but they said listen to you. But then you say, you know what? The bank has an asset size of 500 million. Your NPA is at 10%, which means 50 billion at stake. Here we're going to put in an early warning system. Even if it achieves only 1% on implementation, you have 500 million at your disposal. So we are talking about a 2 million spend for this product and you're going to get 500 million as soon as the product goes live. So now that tells me a story which everybody up to the board is willing to listen. So how do you story tell with numbers? It's something investment banking greatly teaches. Second, moving on to Accenture. What is the problem that you're trying to solve? I think management consulting teaches you to look at business impact first, talking about putting yourself in the shoes of the customer and the client and saying, how do I make your life easier? And we say that you have this huge burden of compliance and we're going to get you knocked off your penalties in something like 3 months because RBI levies penalties if you don't do that compliance. And you say what takes you 12 weeks is going to take you 3 weeks. And then everybody's listening. So it's more about the sale angle that Vinay touched upon. But what do you sell? How do you build a product? I think with the end goal in mind as to how are you helping the customer, that learning came from management consulting. Third was obviously I went into core technology bank and there was a huge learning because it's not until you actually build a product that I thought I knew technology. I mean, I was working in investment banking, I was focused on technology, then I was in management consulting, I was transitioning teams, and I thought I knew technology, but not when you build the product, you really learn what you don't know because it goes through the fundamentals of the nuts and bolts of designing a system from paper all the way to scale up. And in a bank, it goes to like 25,000, 250,000 transactions per second. Can you handle that? The answer is it must. And for that, I unlearned a lot of what I thought I knew. And then it was more about relearning technology. I was sitting with coders and trying to understand why we can't scale up. Why is this architecture not worthy and something else is? And more about how do you migrate from an on-prem to a cloud model that needs the fundamental re-architecture. It's not that simple. I know. So that were some of the great learnings from each of these tracks. And most important to get all of this on board is how do you build a team that shares the vision? I asked that question because when you're recruiting for an Accenture, it's easier in my mind because it's a brand. They know what they're coming in for. There's no job description in product development because people know they have to develop products, but you're doing everything on a given day. And it's your dream that you're selling. It's a vision. There's nothing concrete when you're building up. And you need to recruit co-workers, not employees. And that makes a big difference in the model as such. So I know I'm out of time, but I would love to take questions in any of these areas.
Awesome. KK?
No, one, I think, Jaya, you had the advantage of going through diverse roles, each of which has, in a way, taught you something in the context of product building. And I'm sure there are many in the audience who are resonating with that, who say, oh, you know what, I also have that. But if you had to pick up the top three qualities which are required to be successful in the product business, what would you think they would be?
First is to put yourself in the shoe of your client. He's paying. So if he's paying for something, what is he really paying for? Can you articulate that need? And are you indispensable to his business? I think that's where you need to think differently from services and products, because services, you're listening to the customer, but listening differently. You're saying, tell me your needs, I'll do it for you. In product, you go with a fitment of saying, here's what the product can do. It's a pre-canned version of what is your vision of what needs to do. And that's the lowest common denominator. It's more what most clients need. And therefore, you need to take on the role of an expert advisor. You're no longer listening to the customer and saying, here is the menu, tell me what to do, I do it for you. But you're going in as a product leader. You're going as a visionary. You're going as an expert in an industry where you serve. And that needs a different kind of finish, and that needs continuous learning. So I think that is the biggest learning. As long as you stop learning, as long as you're not up to date in our area, for instance, with the latest compliance requirement and what it does to you, and your ability to translate and educate the customer on what's needed for that, and here is what we do for you, I think that becomes a moot point. You ask three learnings, I usually have long answers, but I'm packing multiple learnings into one. So I want to fit it all in. So I think learning is unlearning the past and going with it. Just pick what you learned, which served a purpose for the current role, but unlearn all of it. Like, for instance, saying no. One of you said, Derick said, saying no. You must say no in a product development scenario, because the next release or the next version may not even have the features. The planned roadmap doesn't have the features that the customer is requesting for. So it's more about, again, going back to education and tell him why it's not needed today, but why it's kind of in the roadmap and what you need to do. Third is being extremely agile. And I kind of point back to you, KK, on this, because the street is unforgiving, right? And you know what the investors want also keeps changing. Because last year it was fashionable to say Upekkha is the mantra. Today, if you don't have an ARR, you're not being, you're no longer cool. What subscription revenue is the only thing people are asking, at least me. So I think, it's more about the agility and the ability to say, I thought I was like really cool because I was very profitable. I had a great EBITDA. You go and say, give me the cloud revenues. So the ability to, jump from not lose focus on your product as such and where you need to be, but the ability to kind of cater to different business models from an investor perspective, from a client perspective. So you have push and pull in different directions. How do you be balanced and not lose focus and continue on the journey? I think that's really important. Long answer, but I had to say that.
Right.
Thanks, Jaya. Any folks, Vinay, Derick, Sudha, do you have a question for Jaya or comment?
I had a quick question, Jaya. Specifically on the product discoverability. You have a great product. How do you let the world discover that you exist? Any marketing levers which dramatically work for you? What experiments worked? What did not?
We had a vision. Our vision was to build products in India, for India, and then take it to the globe. We the reverse, because we normally take global products and cater it and kind of tweak it to India. So that is your vision: make it in India, take it to the globe. So when you have a clear vision, it's easier to articulate that, saying this is what I'm doing and here's the focus. The ability to discover is quite difficult when you are starting grounds up. And what we did was to merge. We wrote articles like nobody's business. You have expert view on a topic in risk management. We were there. It's happening. Jet Airways crisis. We wrote about it. Wrote about it from a risk management perspective and what should have been done from a governance point of view. So pretty much everything topical connected to risk, connected to governance, connected to compliance, and we have an expert view on what is happening not only in India but across the globe. I think when it is topical and when it resonates with the reader, you're heard. And then more and more, it was more connect, give me more, right? So just to give you an example, we wrote 70 thought leadership articles just in 1 year, last year.
Wow.
And these were picked up by pretty much leading media houses. And so that is something that I personally, as the CEO, undertake and say, this is what we're articulating as our vision. Here are the areas that it's going to resonate with us. So create a brand identity and staying focused with that identity, even when you're back to do multiple things, I think it's really important. And taking it to globe again, just be very current. And I would kind of say this continuous learning that I spoke about in an earlier question, it needs to translate to continuous learning for all your stakeholders, which means you have a point of view, you write thought, but you are staying focused on that and you do brand building around it.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sudha. So last but not least, we come to KK. So KK, do you want to summarize what are your thoughts on learnings? And the question that I have for you is, you were a services startup a long
Yes.
time ago,
Yes.
and now you're funding product startups. So how do you think about capital allocation between these two?
See, probably I'll start with that, Prasanna, because if you look at the capital journey, while I think the businesses are very different, my first premise is this hard distinction between services and products itself is blurring a bit. They are more and more overlapping. But still, the capital allocation and capital journey is little different. In a services context, capital is more what I call an incremental capital, which is required. You raise some small capital, you reach a certain stage, then you probably, and you don't require large amounts of capital in a service business because the ability to reach to break even and start making money, that timeline is much shorter. Whereas in a product business, one understands it's more a step function. You build a product for which you probably raise an angel round, you raise through friends and families. Then when you reach the stage of really establishing strongly a product market fit, you probably need a lot more capital without any revenues probably coming in or very incremental revenues. You've acquired your first few customers, you need to get to the next stage. So it is very much a stepwise capital lab. The second key difference between services and products from a capital deployment perspective is in the services business, capital is deployed just on the core business. I'm recruiting people to deliver a service to a customer. I won't think of recruiting a few people to build the next good AI model which might deliver or solve a problem for the customer. So the deployment is far more in services, the core business, whereas in products, it can be for building the platform, building the product, or many times even outside the core business. In a services business, you never think in terms of doing marketing. You never think in terms of getting into the social media. You never think in terms of writing blog posts and getting influencers to sort of promote that much more. So those are very key differences in terms of what I think one sees in the capital deployment. Having said that, I think some of the core qualities which you build in a services organization, I think are very important even in building a successful product company. which is really starting with the customer focus. I think a services exposure teaches you to be customer focused, though very much you fold your hands and tell Mr. Customer, tell me what to do. That's also a nuanced way of a customer focus. You need to change from there to become a good storyteller of saying that how does it solve a problem for a customer, which is one of my learning. So people who are wanting to transition from services to products must start becoming good storytellers of the problem. In fact, I many times force entrepreneurs to come to me to say that, hey, in 25 sentences, tell me what is the problem you're solving. Yeah, and make it as dramatic as possible, because that in a way you see how their storytelling capability and the problem and the passion of solving that problem is known. Now, the second key lesson which I have particularly for people transitioning from services to products is the focus which you give on architecture and technology. See, pretty much in a services context, you assume what is there. The client has a mainframe, the client has a client server, the client has an SAP, so I will run with it. Whereas here, you need to think in terms of architecture, you need to think of what is it you need to do right for the customer. And the third thing is, how do you really all the time keep thinking the cost value equation for the customer? See, many times in a services context, you're doing work for hire. So what it costs the customer, and you're many times not even aware of it, or if you're aware of it, you want to make it higher. Whereas in the product context, you have to be very different. You have to be thinking, are you making a value for him? And that's how you'll become sticky. So those are some of the key lessons which I think people transitioning from a services to a product should constantly keep questioning themselves.
That's fantastic, KK. Folks, do you have any questions for him?
We have lots of questions. So maybe we'll pick one. And I probably want to pick the avatar of yours, KK, which is more on your current role, right? With Mela Ventures. Often crossing the chasm in earlier days meant who's adopting your product first and how do you take it to a mature stage. Now, crossing the chasm means how do you transition from, say, an on-prem to a cloud model, SaaS as such? So, what is your learning been on based on your evaluation of companies in the space? Because crossing the chasm is hard when you kind of move from an on-prem to a cloud model. It's easier if you start your business as a SaaS product.
Correct.
But if you are doing on-prem, right, and then you need to migrate, it's much harder.
Absolutely.
Again, there's an unlearning on that process, and your customers expect you to be on-prem. They're like, now, why would I move to a subscription model when I've already bought this, right? And it's more your learning. So, what are you seeing from entrepreneurs? Are you kind of like looking at how are companies successfully making this transition, and what are your learnings from that?
Great question.
No, I think that's a great question, Jaya. I think this is a tough problem, to be honest. And I think it also starts with where is it we've really grown with. I think we're very comfortable with building solutions for customers which are on-prem. So many times, even when we think of a SaaS model, we think of it as a technology issue, saying, I'm going to build a native cloud application, I'm going to make it multi-tenanted, I'm going to build security architecture on top of it, without really going through the exercise of saying, what does it mean for the customer? Which is why many times I tell entrepreneurs saying that, have you thought through what does it mean to the customer? How is he going to, in a way, justify it within this organization? And the other factor which I see many entrepreneurs miss is that I think in the on-prem journey, many of us have made the sale to the CIO and his organization and are comfortable with that. The moment you go to a subscription based model, you're getting into really meeting the business users, and we try and even avoid them because we can't talk their language. Yeah. So I advise entrepreneurs saying that, hey, I think you need to get comfortable talking to the business user, talking their language. Yeah. And the change management in that is far more important than thinking of saying, what are the issues involved in transitioning from to a native cloud architecture. To be honest, I think with the cloud platforms available, transition is much easier today. There are so many tools available. But I think managing the client and his change is a far more important aspect.
So one of the questions from the audience is interesting.
Yeah.
So let's think about folks who are still in their services companies, maybe in a VP of sales role like Vinay was, or something in the product side like Derick was, or in a consulting role. So when you're doing a product, when you think about, hey, in 2 years or 3 years, I'm going to become an entrepreneur, I'm going to build a product company, how would you learn more about the vertical, more about that space than the customer themselves, than people in the customer themselves? Because like I think Jaya was saying, hey, you should be able to convince the customer that I am solving an important problem for you. Yes, I'm only solving these 3 problems, but these 3 are the important problems for you. How would you learn more than the customers to be able to articulate that well? Do any of you want to take that question?
Yeah. I think the easiest one from a services perspective, when you're doing services for a company, you notice things that you're not doing. I think that's been a great learning. It's more about you, whether the customer is right or wrong, you do that for him, because that's the mantra of services, right? So you can kind of say, could you do this differently? But it's more to do with you notice little things that could be done better, but you were not in a position to go back and do that. So you learn more about, and I think it's irreplaceable fact that you have to keep becoming a domain expert. What happens in services often is that you don't develop a core competence in a particular domain. If retail needs tomorrow, you're an architect, you move from one place to other, then you move on to a different industry. So core competency in terms of learning, I think it's really important, and that you read about the domain you're passionate about, the one that you have the longest experience of serving, and then the ability to articulate in that domain is something that's really important.
Super.
I think if you're a VP and you have like say 10, 15 years of experience, 7 or 8 in a particular industry is good enough. If you're passionate about it, learn more about it, because you can't be a thought leader if you're not learning. And you can't, today you have courses available from every possible avenue, and they're all delivered to your home. So there's no excuse for saying I'm not learning.
Got it.
It's as important as breathing.
Got it. Vinay, Sudha, Derick, you want to add something to
I
that?
think one very important thing is nobody is the fountain of everything, right? Knowledge-wise. So, find the right co-founders, right? So, it's not, you have a core competence in terms of what you're trying to do. And if you have the domain competence, then, you are that. If if not, it's somebody else from your team, right? Put together a team that has all the skills combined. There is no substitute to, again, having that domain. Unless you're able to articulate the ROI, it is pointless, right? Once you have the first 2-3 wins, and then you can find a way in which you extend to the next adjacency, right? But getting that first push, you absolutely have to have the way to articulate where the customer is using a product and things like that. So, and
So
the
the
best
thing
way is create a
I
team.
had to add here, Prasanna, is in services, you need all stars. Every person who's handling a client has to be a star. In a product company, you can't do with so many stars. You don't want so many stars. You have a core set of stars, and they have the point of view, like Jaya said. You know a lot, you're a domain expert, but you're not going to go and sit in front of the client. You need to be able to replicate that knowledge and get it out as a paper to all your customers. And I think that's one of the fundamental differences in the way you man services companies. I mean, I could say women, but I mean, to put a simple point, compared to a product company. A product is an execution business. You can, all the thinking and $10 won't get you your next client. You need execution and consistent execution.
Got it.
Yeah. So,
Derick, you want to add something about journey?
no, I just wanted to share a story. I mean, the best way to accelerate learning is to actually do it. So in for the well scoring app we developed, we had a bunch of guys from Bangalore, tech guys, wear the safety suits and spend 1 week in an oil rig, experiencing the heat and dust and all of the world dramatically changed after that. So complete extreme empathy and immersion.
Immersion.
Point to share on product improvement, which I will try and do in 2 minutes. I know you have only 9.5 minutes, Prasanna. I don't think there's a right or a wrong way to improve a product. The litmus test is it successful in the market? That means, are there dollars coming for it? And is there usage? I have a few thoughts on how do you learn before you bring something into your product. I mean, our it's a hard learning, right? We all learned it the hard way, which is you could say, okay, let me put a little button here and let me see how many of my users click on that button. There's nothing behind, it's empty, but I still can do a very light touch product sort of enhancement without actually throwing all my product people into it. There are 3-4 ways of doing it. One is this button, one is you could have a light product, one is you could do a manual experiment like Derick said, we put our people there and made them solve the problem. I think product improvement is one of those areas where it's a $64 million question. Nobody has the right answers. But these are some of the thoughts I had to share in how you could take your first product and then iterate it, because it's a constant journey. That's all I had to say on product
Thank you.
improvement.
So, folks, I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to summarize some of the key learnings, right? So, just to go back to the beginning, I've seen a ton of founders who built, for example, all the way from a small mobile app, a single person mobile app solutions builder alone, doing it in Ahmedabad. Now doing more than 2 million of revenue in 2 million of recurring revenue selling an SMB product, all the way to people who've been in enterprise businesses, McKinsey, Accenture, building revenues of $5 million, $10 million, $20 million, selling to enterprises. Vast founders who built vast businesses transitioning into products, founders who built agencies, marketing agencies transition into products, all sorts of founders who built all kinds of services business transition into product. And I think I'm just going to pick on some common threads that I've seen which have helped those founders become successful, touching on some of these things. One common thread was the desire to learn and the ability to unlearn. I think that is absolutely critical for founders to be able to both learn new things and unlearn many of the old things. And really, the interesting thing there is many of those earlier skills were what made them successful in their past lives, but may serve them very poorly in the new life, right? So on the topic of hearing no's, in a product business, your conversion rate from somebody who looks at you and talks to you to somebody who becomes a customer is probably in the 2% to 4% to 6% range, right? You're not going to be above 5%. So you're going to hear 95 no's for every 5 yeses that you get. And within those same customers, they're going to ask you for 100 features, out of which you might have only 10 or 15. Now, how do you hear that many no's and go on is something that requires a huge amount of mental fortitude, huge amount of equanimity to be able to say, look, I don't do this, I do the other thing. Yes, you are a Fortune 500 company, or yes, you are one of the top companies in this space, or yes, you're ready to give me a lot of money, but I'm going to have to say no to you because I can't afford to build that into my product. And I will continue to believe that I am still building the right product. So that requires a huge amount of mental fortitude. The second thing, which is something that Vinay spoke about briefly, Derick as well, is the platform versus product. The solving something that's cool for yourself in the AI, ML, whatever it is, versus actually making a difference into the daily lives of your customers, wherever they may be. So that's a huge shift that the best founders are able to make. And that, I think, again, a lot of people get stuck in, my way or the highway kind of a model where they're thinking, hey, I am right. And, I'm just going to do what I'm going to do. and I don't care if others are wrong. So there's a fine balance in being able to hear 95 no's, right, and staying with your conviction. And on the other hand, that 95 no's cannot become 100 no's. If you hear 100 no's, you got to change something, right? And that's a very important skill, and that I think is very different between a services business and a product business, because in a services business you can keep selling something to every person you meet practically, but in a product business, you're 99 times you're going to say no, right? These are like super critical things which I've seen differentiate some of the product founders from from their earlier services avatars, right? So I don't need to go into why one founder is better than another, but if you want to evolve as a person into a successful product founder, what do you have to change? So before we leave, I'm going to ask each of you to think and just give me literally like 5 words, right? I'm going to take Krishnakumar's 25 sentence and make it into like literally 5 words. If you had to say 5 words to your self of 2010 or 2012 to make you a better product entrepreneur, what would that be? Derick, we'll start with you by putting you on the spot.
5 words, right? Okay. Extreme empathy and pay.
What was the second thing?
Willingness to pay for the product, testing
Extreme empathy and willingness to pay. Great. Sudha?
Get out of the job now.
Get out of the job now. Okay, 6 words. We'll take it. Vinay?
Yeah, I guess I'll go with the scam 1992. Risk hai to ishq hai.
Jaya? Jaya, we can't hear you.
KK gave me 25 sentences. You gave me 5. I'm going to just take 2. Focus, passion. Focus, passion. I think I'll explain maybe because it's just 2 words. Focus needs to be insane in building a product, and focus on what the customer wants. Focus on business impact. Focus on building your business. Focus on building the right team, and passion. That's the only way you can survive the product business.
Thank you, Jaya. KK?
You are the company's salesman.
Awesome. Great. So I will tell you my favorite words, which I repeat to all entrepreneurs, especially because we are in India, and almost everybody here is a developer who thinks that like writing a line of code is practically free, right? So the words that I usually tell most founders is from Jerry Maguire, the movie. So it is show me the money. So with that, we'll end this session. We'll give a minute and 45 seconds back to all the folks in the audience. Hope you enjoyed it.